Hello, America. Welcome to the Ryan Mack Show. Today's episode is on the history of the Republican Party. Before I begin, I want to discuss the fallacies and incorrect quotes and comments from Democrats today that counteract the real history of the Republican Party and what we stand for. You'll hear Joe Biden and alike call us terrorists, extremists, white supremacists, and my favorite, white Christian nationalist. Even as recent as his speech from the NEA and in front of the Independence Hall, he calls half the country dangerous and are threats to democracy. We are a constitutional republic, and we've got to fight to take this country back from the Democrats and the far left and their cult-like members. From slavery to abortion to climate change, Democrats keep finding ways to ruin the lives of everyday Americans. Democrats have always hated America, its freedoms. They've hated conservatives. They hate you. They hate me, the American people. They are the party of hatred, the party of extremism, racism, and by their policies, their proof is there, today and in the past. Sure, Republicans have had their fair share of problems over the years, but it's the Democrats, as we've seen from last week's episode, that want to destroy what this country was founded on, and it is up to us to take it back and stop it. So starting in, the Republican Party was founded, like I discussed last week, in opposition to slavery in 1854, and it's known also as the Grand Old Party or the GOP. Founded in opposition of slavery, not just because they thought it was a bad thing, but they wanted to stop its expansion, and in order to save the country and bring the country back from splitting up, they thought the best way to do so was in opposition to slavery. They also fought for more rights after the Civil War for African Americans and women in general. Today, it's more conservative, favors a smaller, limited government control, and less regulations and taxes. It is socially conservative and also calls for less intervention in the economy. And so as we go further, by contrast, the Federalist Party, as some of supporters of Jefferson split from Washington and Hamilton, they were known as the Federalist. Jefferson didn't want the centralized government that they wanted, and he split and became known as the Democratic Republicans. The Federalist Party eventually dissolved after the War of 1812, and by the 1830s, the Democratic Republicans had evolved into what is now known as the Democratic Party, who, the father of the party is Andrew Jackson, like I mentioned last week, and that's history. That's right there in black and white. You can read about it. The goal of the Republican Party was not to just abolish slavery in the South right away, but rather to prevent its westward expansion. They feared would lead to a domination of slaveholding interests nationally. And it was by the 1860 election that the split between Southern and Northern Democrats over slavery ultimately led to Abraham Lincoln to victory. And he was literally the main source of Democrat hatred in the South at the time for white Southern Democrats. But he wasn't very popular. He only won by 40% of the popular vote. And as Reconstruction era happened during the course of the Civil War and afterward, Lincoln and other Republicans began to see abolition of slavery as a strategic move to help them win the war. He issues the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863. And by the end of the war, the majority of Congress was in the hands of the Republican Party, and which led to them passing the 13th Amendment. Frustrated by the problems and inaction of Andrew Jackson, as well as the treatment of blacks in the southern states during the Reconstruction era, Republicans became radicalized. And so that's when they forced through legislation protecting the rights of blacks, including civil rights and voting rights for black men at the time. Voting rights for women came later on. And these Republican Reconstruction policies ultimately solidified the whites in the South, their loyalty to the Democratic Party for decades to come. It was during Reconstruction that Republicans became increasingly more supportive of big business and financial interests in the North, which was more industrialized during this time. The federal government expanded during this time, during the war. And we see this with the passage of the first income tax. And big business, big money people in the North took advantage of this, of the increased spending by the federal government. Then we come into the Progressive Era and the Great Depression. So because of the Republican Party's association with business interests, by the early 20th century, it was really the party of upper-class elite. You know, big wealth expansion. You have this economic boom of business and industrialization. But the rise of the progressive movement, which back then sought to improve life for working-class Americans and encourage Protestant values, which also led to Prohibition in 1919, Republicans championed progressive social, economic, and labor reforms, including Theodore Roosevelt, which later on he had split from the more conservative wing of the party after leaving office. So in social and economic and labor reforms, there were Republicans that were for improving the lives of the working class. So it wasn't just a big business era. Now, Republicans benefited from the prosperity of the 20s, but after the stock market crash in 1929, which ushered in the Great Depression, Americans blamed them for the crisis, and they basically grew their resistance and used more support for government intervention. So this is what led to FDR easily winning over Hoover in 1932. But then we have the emergence of a new conservative era. The relief programs that were included in FDR's New Deal, which has been a disaster over the course of history, we've seen this, the expansion of Social Security and welfare state, the beginning of the Federal Reserve. I mean, these were just destructive things that happened over the New Deal that promised social and economic improvements, but really were just a Band-Aid for Americans. The FDR launched an era basically of the Democratic dominance that would last for most of the next 60 years. And between 1932 and 1980, Republicans only won 4 presidential elections and had congressional majority only 4 years. So it was a major Democratic control for much of those 50 years from the 30s and 50s. So we see heading into the era of Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was really a centrist and more moderate. He was the only president from 53 to 61. He supported equal rights for women and African Americans, a conservative, principle. That resurgence led to Barry Goldwater's nomination in 1964, which continued Nixon's ill-fated presidency. We all know what happened there with his issues. But its culmination of conservatism reached with Ronald Reagan in 1980. And the South became a major political sea change starting after World War II, when many white Southerners began migrating to the GOP due to their opposition of big government. So they changed from big government policies and expansion of wealth to less government intervention and a free economic enterprise and more conservative values. So Southern whites expanded their support to GOP. And as the South became more conservative, it also became less racist. So we've seen this in the Democratic eras when they moved north to prominent big cities. What happens? It fell apart, and it became more racist and more race hostile in some of these bigger cities run by Democrats. So as the South became more culturally conservative, it became less racist, and they more concentrated on agriculture. So now many black voters who remained loyal to the Republican Party since the Civil War began voting Democrat after the Depression and the New Deal era. This also led to support for civil rights and expanded labor unions, as well as conservative Christian opposition to abortion and cultural war issues. So the Republican Party never branched from their conservative Christian opposition to abortion. That's never changed. And going further, even to today, it's even stronger for the support for life. If you're pro-choice and pro-abortion, then it's more likely to lean Democrat. So now we have Republicans from Reagan to Trump. After running on a platform that was based entirely on reducing the size of the federal government, Reagan, after Carter destroyed the economy, we went through a period of high gas prices, high inflation, everything, stagflation, just the worst. Kind of similar to what we're running to now with Joe Biden's policies. But Reagan built the economy by and increasing spending, military. He spearheads huge, massive tax cuts that blew up the economic expansion of the middle class. And championed the free market with policies that became known as Reaganomics. He was really the best thing for the Republican Party at the time, right at the right time when the country needed it. We were heading for another disaster financially from the policies of another Democrat. Carter was basically what Biden is now, except Biden is way worse because he's been hijacked by the far left and his policies, the climate change, the new Green Deal, all these far left progressive policies. They've been terrible. So, on foreign policy aspect, the United States emerged as the lone victor in its long-running Cold War with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union fell. Reagan was instrumental with that. The economy began to show signs of weakness, however, growing the national debt, which helped foster popular dissatisfaction with Reagan's successor, George H.W. Bush. Bush was terrible. He was absolutely the worst. He's one of those establishment types. He's not a true conservative. He was never a true conservative. That's why he only lasted one term. GOP later recaptured the White House in 2000. Bush's son, W, over Al Gore. We all know how that election ended, controversially. He was initially popular, Bush was, particularly after 9/11. But they lost support fast thanks to growing opposition to the war in Iraq and the economy, which started to take a hit as a result of the war. After Obama was elected in 2008, the Conservative Party movement grew again in opposition to Obama's reforms and policies that took hold of the country, and it sank into another recession. The same policies that Obama had, Biden is now doing, except almost tenfold, because Obama was smart and then Biden is not. So the policies may be similar, but they are more destructive now than even Obama's policies were. Same people, different positions. So now that led to the biggest populist Tea Party movement. And it was because of Obama's economic and social reform policies that helped Republicans gain control of Congress by 2014. And then we have come all the way up to the 2016 election. Trump defeats Hillary. Republicans controlled the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives, and the majority of states at the time. But they were still unable to do most of Trump's work as a conservative agenda because he had rhinos like Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham and a scattering of others who just would not control the conservative movement. They gave in to Democrats. But you see with Trump's policies became the biggest economic turn in history. After Obama-Biden economic failures, the U.S. rebuilt the economy by cutting taxes, cutting regulations, growing unemployment, lowering unemployment to its 50-year low. We became energy independent. No new wars broke out during Trump's administration. The border was secure. We had lower crime. America was in a better place. And now, look what just Trump built over 4 years. And to have Biden and Kamala on the far left grounded to dust in just over 2. So we look all the way throughout their history, and you see that the fallacies the Democrats have said today. Republicans are racist. They're misogynists. They're bigots. They hate gays. They hate women. They want to take your freedoms away. None of this has literally ever been true. Do they have their problems over the years and being able to follow through on some of their promises like every politician does? Absolutely. And they still have their problems. Conservatives are what needs to be running primarily in the party. I'm a registered Republican, but I'm a conservative, and I believe conservative values hold stronger than just being a Republican. I vote Republican because they are the party that controls most of the values and principles that I believe in. And when you look at the Democrat Party, you can't even tell what they stand for anymore. Do they support rights? But whose rights? Because during COVID, they didn't care about your rights. They don't care about women. They just want your vote. They want illegals' votes. They want everybody else is just a number and a token for them. They don't really care about you as an American. And that's what I believe is really important about voting conservative and standing strong conservative principles. So we've seen this throughout history. Despite changing some of their ideas and adopting certain beliefs, they've strayed from their core beliefs. And today's GOP, they have gone back to their core principles from Reagan to Trump. Economic growth, limited government involvement, and a constitutional oath to protect the rights of Americans. That's every American. And every Democrat since has fought to erase those freedoms and destroy America from within. And they hate conservatives. They will cancel you, they will arrest you, they will come after you, and they will try to ruin your life in order to get you to agree with them. And it's really destructive. And so my hope is that after being reminded in kind of a refresher course of history the last 2 weeks from both parties, and you're starting to see the difference between the Democrats and Republicans. Not only will Republicans have your better interest at heart, but Democrats will always destroy what you deem is fair and just and right. And so I think it's really important that we continue to remember that these lies the Democrats are now spewing about Republican Party and their supporters, it is just that, lies, and it's insane. And they're not just coming after the leaders of the Republican Party. Trump is the active leader. They're not coming after him. He's in the way. They're coming after you and I. And you need to be ready for that, because it may not be Trump and his associates at the FBI watch list. It'll be you and I, and that we will be answering to them at our front door. So I think it's important that we understand where we're at as a country. We are at a tipping point. And I think November, which is right around the corner, is a very important election for this country. And I hope that after hearing, if you hear these last couple weeks, you take it to heart, that you understand the difference between the two parties. You may not always agree with Republicans and how they do things, but they're more often than not going to be serving your best interests over the Democrat Party. If you love the Constitution, if you love pro-life, if you love the Second Amendment, if you love being able to be free to practice any religion and to do things in your life how you see fit, then you need to vote Republican. If you like low gas prices, if you like low energy costs, you like choosing how to live your life the way you want it and keeping things the way it should be, then vote Republican. If you want pro-choice and pro-abortion and climate change is your thing, then by all means, vote Democrat. But do not claim that you are conservative. So I hope that sticks with you guys. And thank you again for listening. I'm continuing to grow my podcast. I'm hopeful that it's continuing to grow. And as I go for more episodes, I will continue to get better at getting the information out there. But I wanted to bring you guys some historical perspective on the two parties, especially since the current administration decides that it can just destroy any and all credibility and lie about what the Republican Party stands for. So that is all for today's episode. Stay tuned for next week's episode and follow me as always on Facebook at The Ryan Mack Show and wherever you get your podcast. See ya. Disciple, so don't you be offended.